Hello everyone, I hope you are having a great holiday. Alright, so let me start the lecture today. So today I'm covering the two topics. So the first topic is about the family, which is very big one in the sociology. The next topic is the crime and the social control. So I will not cover everything in all the pages because of the time limitation. But as these are very important chapters, but I will try to pick up some of the key elements and the key topics in those chapters. So let me try to summarize some new findings and important findings. So sociology. In sociology, there are so many sub-disciplines. So medical sociology and the gender, as we learned so far, the race, and others. So there are so many disciplines and sub-disciplines in sociology, but still, sociology of family is very big part of the sociology. So in sociology of family, there are so many types of the textbooks, and even we can talk. So if we can cover this topic on the whole semester. So if you go to grad school in sociology, there are many classes named as Sociology of Family or Family Demography or Introduction of the Family Sociology, like that. So this is so big, but I cannot cover everything. So I will pick up some of the new trends and some of the key topics in Sociology of Family. So it was a very recent survey about what is the most important cause of individual earnings and variation in United States today. So as we learned last week, this is about the fundamental causes of the income inequality, and the highest answer rate were concentrated on the family issues as the family network and the parental social class and the parental education. We can see that anyway in social sciences and many of the social phenomena, family is still very big part of the inequality and many of the intergenerational transfers. But in family, there are many types of the formats of the family. So not only in those Western countries, but Asian countries, there are many of the similar types of the family, meaning of the co-residential union of the two adults, sometimes many times heterosexual the adults, and sometimes many times as well. So same-sex marriages and the homosexual marriages and the union formations. But anyway, regardless of the gender and regardless of their sexual orientation, the formation of the unions and the co-residential unions as an institutional unit, these are the basic units of the family. But in your own definition, maybe as I asked you before, if we need to define the notions and the key concepts of the family, then what would be the conceptualization of the family? Then you would answer that, as I just mentioned before, the meeting of the union formation of the two adults and over 18 years old, not only based on their heterosexual meetings, but also the homosexual meetings and so on. So these are maybe some of the key portions of the definition that the meeting and the union and adults and others. So we can define those types of the conceptualization, the family and the marriage. So as you could see in those icons and the pictures, we can see that the meeting of the two adults and the family, the forming the family with the offsprings of the children, the biological children and adopted children and whatsoever, and without the children as well. But we can also see the homosexual images in the image stocks, and I use the Canva instead of the Microsoft PowerPoint. But there are so many suggestions of the homosexual family images. So in these days, anyway, the heterosexual families and the homosexual families, these are all accepted as the normal types of the families. And we become a family, sometimes it's very vague, the clear standards to define the non-family members and the family members because of timing. Then we become family maybe when we begin the committed relationship, or we can form the union, or we move into the co-residential places, and when we adopt a child and have the child and turn into the pregnancies and legally married. So there are many types of the timings we can see, but we all accept that. Even though there are many types of the unions, but we assume that if we start the committed relationship in the co-residential union and cohabitation, yeah, it might be a couple of the family. Moving into the place as well, the cohabitation, adopting a child and having a child or children and legally married. Yeah, formal meaning of the marriage. We can see that these are the formation of the families. But anyway, the formal definition. In terms of the formal definition of the family, we would see that the family is defined a group of the two or more people, not only the others and their offspring and children, who are linked to one another by blood, marriage, adoption, or shared commitment, and will look after and caring each other. And family is almost universal format of the union, because every culture, I cannot say all the cultures, but about every culture has their own format, or the very common format of the families. So that's why we can see that family is very universal type of the phenomena. Family members receive physical and emotional support, and their children are socialized. So these are the basic functions and the basic functions of the family. And marriage and family, the formal marriage. So not only the formal marriage, we also have the many types of the other union formations, but the family is done by the legal recognition and the legal legislation. The family is first a socially recognized group of the people by the blood marriage and the security of emotional bond, as well as the social commitment to each other. Family of orientation is family one is born, and family of the procreation is family formed through the marriage. So we can see many of the ranges of the definitions of the family in this part. So what is the single most important element of the marriage and family? So whenever I ask this question to other students in the previous semesters, they said trust and the economic structure and economic support, and what are others? Maybe love. And these were the most frequent answers in previous semesters. So we can see that the love and the romantic emotion and the trust and the relationship would be very important for the family members and the single most elements of the family. But the notion that and the primary function of the family became the love not very long time ago. So it's kind of the very recent issue, because a long time ago, before the maybe you can see that the Pride and Prejudice and Gone with the Wind, which are the classical formats of the novels, at that point in time already, the love was a very big part of the romantic relationship, and also the family formation. But before that, long time ago, we could see that the Romeo and Juliet, for the marriage, the traits of the family, the agreement between or among those families were more important than the romantic love or emotional attachment to each other. So we can see that long time ago, it was more about the familiar decision, not only based on the love of the couples, but also the family decision. So my question would be, is marriage a family decision or individual decision more likely to be? Because the answer would be mixed one. But anyway, marriage in the culture. So based on the culture, probably our answers could be very different, because if you can decide by yourself, or if you can support for all the procedures of the family, or all the procedures of the family, the union formation, probably it would be the individual decision. But if the processes of the union formation of the formal marriages are more dependent on the money from your family members or your parents, probably the union formation or the marriages would be more familiar decision. For example, so as I know a lot about the family culture in South Korea. In South Korea, I would say the family or the union formation or the formal marriage would be more likely to be the familiar decision instead of the individual decision because of the cost of the housing. So when they meet together, and this is kind of just in the general example, but if young couples wanna live in the metropolitan city or the urban area, the median price of the homes, but is already outdated because there were big increase after COVID-19. But the median prices of the homes in Seoul, the capital city, $0.6 million. And the median price of the homes in wealthy counties, $1.5 million. And maybe this is very hard to reach for as the very average workers in South Korea. So that's why the parental wealth, the wealth of the family or their parents are more bigger or the very larger determinant of the marriage. So usually the class, the young couples from the more wealthier families, they are very likely to marry early because of the differences in the budget and the differences in the wealth of the families. And also the wedding ceremony and the marriage ceremony, usually these are very expensive in some culture. So not only South Korea, maybe the Italia and maybe Mexico and other countries, they have very similar culture that having many of the costs in the ceremony, and then the family decisions are more important sometimes than the individual decision, because the individuals, the young couples and young males and young females, they cannot support for their own marriages. So in these cultures, probably the marriages are not only the individual decisions but familiar decisions. Alright, so types of families, it might be very conventional knowledge. You already have nuclear family, extended family, so let me pass this through. And also the types of the cohabiting unions, the cohabitation, the two adults are meeting each other and staying each other. And the monogamy refers to the practice of marrying only one person at a time, which we perceive that as very formal consensus and very general consensus of the union formation. And also the polygamy is defined as being married and devoted to more than one person at the same time. Maybe I'm not sure about your belief and your culture and your philosophy, but these are not very widely accepted in the United States in these days. And the act of the marrying while still married to another person is the bigamy, which is not also very prevalent form of the union formation in the United States. So we believe that the nuclear family, the family of the two adults and their offsprings, and only having the two generations in that union. So that might be on the definition of the nuclear family. And we all know that the nuclear family would be very recent topic and a recent issue in the families, because long time ago, maybe 100 years ago, 200 years ago, extended families having the three generations in the one housing or one domestic place might be more prevalent format of the examples. But sometimes the studies and the population scholars, they argue that the nuclear family was also very prevalent format of the family, because at that point in time, because of the very short lifespan. So for example, when their life expectancy was around 40 years old, then it's very hard to form the three generations. Their grandparents and their adults and the other children, or the parents of the young children. It was very hard for me because the 40 years might be very short period of time to form the three generations. But otherwise, anyway, there are many of the things that nuclear family would be very prevalent and very representative type of the union formation in these days in modern United States and other countries. So African Americans in the slavery period, they couldn't achieve that because of the very forced migrations and the forced union formations. So it was very hard for the other countries, and also the African Americans in the United States in the slavery system. All right. And these days, so there are very dynamic, very diverse trends and very complex trends in the marriages and the union formation in the United States. But in general, most likely, so not not all the people marry in the very former marriages, but in recent days, the former marriage is not only one type of the union formation as a formal marriage, but we can see that the getting married would be the ultimate format of the union formation, the legal way and the formal way. But there is a very big trend of the decline of the family, which means still the family is very important anyway. So unions, the family, and the cohabitation and the forming the family is still very important, but the degree of the importance has been decreased a lot. So I will explain more about that. Rate of the marriage on the Americans of the 1960s, it was much higher than now, but it's falling more and more. And the higher class people, so the more and the wealthier people and the more educated people are more likely to stay in the marriage longer than the less educated and the less wealthier people because of the stability. And also, if they lose their partnership, they would have the high levels of the opportunity cost, which means the amount of the time and the money and the commitment you need to lose if you choose one thing than another. So the higher class people, the wealthier people, they are more likely to stay in the marriage or do the formal marriage instead of the cohabitation. Still, so more couples in the young generations in the United States, they still make the emphasis on the idea of the romantic love in their marriages, but still higher marriages will end in the divorce and others. But still, in the United States, has higher rate of the marriages than other Western countries or developed countries, and also higher rate of the divorce and the remarriages, which means the serial monogamy. There are the very circulations. Started their first union as marriage and make a divorce and cohabit again, and also coming back to the divorce again and the remarriage again. So we can see many of the examples in many of these types of the examples around us. Okay. Demographics. So single parent families, though, so based on the race, there are very different rates of the or different chances of the having the single parent familyhood and the single parent on their families. So about 30% of the population is single parent families in the United States, but African Americans and the Hispanics, they are more likely, as you can see. And the proportion of the family and the children who are not living with their biological parents are much higher in African American families and the Hispanic families compared with the whites and the Asians. So the functionalism, as you might have some feeling and some of the sense that the functionalism might be more conservative and way more on the familiar values of the bonds and the stability and together. Family is a social institution and it has many of the important functions that support to each other and the support in the economic systems and not whatsoever. And relatively, this is very conservative, considering the traditional rule of families. So the patriarchy and some of the gender inequalities, these are defined as kind of an inevitable situation for the functionalism and for the functionalist family. Family is very primary and the basic unit of the society because most of the people, so in conservative and the classical formats of the theory, they believe that the society is the sum of the families. The families will be the sum of the individuals, so that might be very basic unit of the society in their belief. And it regulates the sexual activity and the social identity based on the socialization. But this functional perspective can be criticized by the conflict theory, always. The family serves the important functions still, so they agree that the conflict theory also agrees about the unit of the function and the very important functions of the family. But still, the patriarchy would be used as the gender inequality, justification of the gender inequality, and also inequality in the family and the marriages. The wealthier people, they stay in the marriage more like that. So because of the inequality in the economic system, there are many of the differences and the differentials of the benefits and the stabilities of the families. So that might be the views of the conflict theory. Contributes to social inequality because, as we could see many of the examples in the unequal childhood, which means middle class families are doing or providing the better parenting, which means the more access to the educational resources and more access to the social network like that. And the family is a source of the conflict for its own members within the family, main source of the conflict and the lack of the money, and then they will be in the higher chances of the intimate violences and the domestic violences. So that's why. So the most causes of the we can see that education attainment, education credentials, parents' education, these are done in many types. These are done in the family. Probably contribute more inequality in the gender and as well. So we can see that images that the women, the women spouses are doing more of the more domestic works. And the symbol interactionism, which is more based on the communication and interaction within the family, focuses on how family members and intimate couples interact in a daily basis and how those types of the daily basis interaction contribute the formation of the identification and their social identity. So argues that family problems may stem from the different settings of the understandings and the perceptions and the expectations in the family. So husbands in middle-class families are more expressive than their counterparts in the lower class. When their wives talk about the problems they have, lower-class husbands are usually quiet and don't interact actively. So these are not always, not the 100% true, but it's showing some of the trends that maybe the less wealthier families or the less wealthy husbands are more stressed because of the cost of the living and their breadwinner roles sometimes. And then they would have the very higher tension than the wealthier families who can support their family much easily and having the less tensions and the stresses. So the parents do more communication and negotiation between the parents and the children, and then we can see other differences. So decline of the family. So in the statistics, the crude marriage rate a long time ago was 12 per 1,000, which means 12 people in 1,000 in the United States were married at that point in time. But after the Great Depression, declined of the marriage rate. But after the World War II, the baby boom period of time, the marriage rate was much higher than before. But then we have the very similar levels of the marriages, but that never increased more than the very higher than of those rates. The decline of the family, which means the main functions of the family is declining as having children, nurturing the children, the two parents, family, and the marriage in the regular age. So by these functions and by these situations, there are many of the reductions of the important notions and important elements of the marriages in the United States and other countries. So marriages per 1,000 people, we can see there are very big declines of the United States, right? So there are many fluctuations in the United States, but they're decline more and more in the United States. And the average age of a woman in marriage increasing a lot. So increasing more and more. So in the United States, okay, so there are the higher ages in the United States than Zimbabwe and Turkey, but Sweden and Norway, there are the higher ages as the average age of the marriages in those countries. So the share of the men who are not married before. So male born in 1980s, which are very young people, they are very small. Very for married. Very small portion of the people were married. But the who born young, long time ago, who are the long time ago, when they were 30 years old, on this proportion and the more higher portion of the people, of the men, were married at that point of time. So we can see that the lower proportion of the 30 years of the males were married in the smaller portion, which means the declines of the marriages. And the rise of the cohabitation. So the cohabitation is very great and very good alternative form of the union formation compared with the marriages. And we can see that living with the partner is increasing more and more compared with the living with spouses in the former marriages. And living arrangement of white, black, and the African American and Latino children, we can see that many of the differences in the married parents for the most likely the whites compared with the African Americans and the Latino, and the cohabiting partners and the one mother only, right? So one mother only, there are the widest proportion in the African Americans and the Hispanics and then whites. So we can see that based on the their racial membership and their ethnicity, we can see the very different types of the proportions of the single parent family or the single mother family. Usually they would have a hard time because of the gender disparities and also the inequalities in education and income. So we'd imagine that African American mothers, the single African American mothers are suffering from many of the poverty issues. So people in romantic relationship living together but not currently married, these are the cohabitations. Cohabitation on divorce. Divorce rate of the married couples who cohabited is higher than the couples married but didn't cohabit. So who started their marriage as the cohabitation, they have the higher divorce rates, which is very interesting to see. Alright, so married couples they have the better psychological well-beings. So there are many findings in the scholarly studies that the married couples would have the more stable relationship. But this is not always true because domestic violences and their satisfaction level of the marriages and the union formation, sometimes these are higher in the cohabitations. So we cannot find a very 100% true trends in everywhere, but still we can see that there are many changes. And also the decline of family. These are contributed by the rise of the non-traditional family. As you could see, single parent family and maybe the cohabitations, not the legal marriages, these are increased a lot in these days. Increased trends of the births of the out of wedlock, which means not born in their spouses, between their spouses and the formal marriages, but we can see that based on the race, there are the higher proportion of the babies born out of wedlock. Based on the educations and the races, there are also very big differences in the babies outside of their former marriage, but came from the cohabitation or non-marriage or non-family relationships. Alright, so here are the children who were born outside the marriage. These are increasing more and more. Denmark, super high, I don't know why. Costa Rica, Chile, and these countries, there are very high rates of the children out of wedlock. And divorce, so I will cover a little more later, but estimated around very big amount of the marriages are ended as a divorce. So this is a very general trend, very clear trends we can see. But anyway, these are not always true that. So if I say you that the divorce rates are increasing and there has been the highly increase in divorce rates so far and that it was very persistent, then it's not true because the marriage rates So similar with the marriage rates, the divorce rates are declining and more based on the survey year. So divorce became easier to obtain legally, but there are the declines of the marriage in the many of the ages, but decline of the various marriages. But married couples who are married at younger age and lower social status, they are more likely to get divorced. But the divorce probability is declining many of the years and many of the age groups. But very interestingly, the general rate of the divorces. The general rate of the divorce is declining in the United States. Right? And decline more and more. So that's the issue. So probably is contributed that the younger generations, the divorce rate is dropping for the Americans under 45 years old. So the younger generations rate per 1,000 married people in 1990, 2017, there are the decline of the divorces, but the over 45, there are more increasing trends of the divorces compared with the 1990. So based on the generations, the generational gaps, there are many of the differences in the divorces. So spouses can be happier and less happier after divorce based on the quality of their well-being and the quality of their marriage relationship before the divorces. But there are better happiness after the marriage, after the divorce, and the less happiness and after the divorce based on the type. But in general, children are the victims. Usually, the children are victims of the mental health and the well-being. Children, they have the lower school performance and the higher chance of the behavior problems after the parental divorce. So this is the very general findings of the studies. Alright, so family conflicts of the low performance. So these are the negative parts of the family dissolutions and the union dissolutions. And the father, and if the children would have the better on the relationship with their father, they would have the better emotional relationship and the better school performances. So we can see on many of the scholarly findings. And well-being marries as well, the benefit both sexes and as well. So the well-being is always very, very important in relationship, in the unions, the marriages and the cohabitation and all together. Okay, so the working mothers as well. In these days, the declines of the divorces are sometimes contributed with the economic situation, but sometimes the higher levels of the divorce rates. These are based on the working mothers who can earn more. Maybe they would have the better chances, and then they don't need to stay in the unhappy the marriages. So that's why maybe. And quality of parenting and other demographic factors, parents can have more in care settings and benefit to staying at home sometimes, but not sure always. And the racial disparities in the marriage. As you could see in the previous graph about that, the African Americans and the people of color, they are more likely to divorce and they are more likely to cohabitation instead of the formal marriages. And domestic violence issues, there are high levels of the domestic violence for the less educated, but most common in poor families. The myth is that wives should obey to husbands. Violence is not severe as wives leave the spaces. All these are the big problems. And domestic violence cannot be justified by all means, but there are a mixture of the connection of the micro and the macro factors. The household level factors are the social status, their class, their residence, and the caste and number of eligible females, and the individual level factors, age, education, and others, and the individual conditions. And these are all connected to each other to result in the domestic violence. And intimate partner violence in the cohabitation, and many of the victims and the difficult abuses. These are happening in many of the families. Okay, and the vulnerable is so in those types of the domestic violences and the intimate partner violence and the child abuses, if these are done in their childhood and the childhood and also in the earlier stages of their life, The problem is that will not stay in only one stage of the time. So very bad types of the environments in the earlier ages that will link to the later life inequalities, and then they will link to even the elderly disparities and the elderly disabilities. So that's why the early life conditions are very important. Okay, so other macro factors impact on the marriages and the family. So I cannot show you this video here, but so in the crisis, so this is video about the Sicario, about the war on drugs situation in Mexico. Then the video is about the shooting situation on the border. So between the U.S. and the troops and the gang, the cartel members of the Mexico. So based on the theory of the attachment theory, which means if there are the crises, people need more support, the emotional support from their family members or the significant others. And then, which will mean that if there are more crises, there are more union formations. For example, if there was the crisis of the COVID-19, and then they expect that there will be higher on the rates of the marriages and the fertilities and others, because they would need to have more attachment. But in the opposite theory, because there are so many stresses during the COVID-19, there would be higher ratio of the divorces because they have so many tensions and the strains, and then they will result in the more divorces in together. So attachment theory, more crisis, more marriages, or more fertility. But trauma and the risk theory or stress theory, less likely. After the crisis or during the crisis, there are the shorter levels of the marriages. That would be the findings. Alright, so these are limitations, cohabitation. There are more cohabitations, and the cohabitation is kind of the alternative format of the marriages, and divorces. There are more divorces, more so well-being family. These are also very important. Maybe I have to repeat, sorry about that, maybe in this part. But these are everything I want to cover in family. Alright, thank you for your attention, and see you in the next video about the crime and the social control.